So I got started with computers when I was young. Actually, even before I started with computers, I was interested in electronics. One day, I liked to watch TV as a kid in fourth grade. I remember looking at the TV and asking the question, how does this work? It was pretty amazing that you could see moving pictures on the screen. It seemed kind of magic to me. I wanted to know how it worked. So my mom, God bless her, always took us to the library every 2 weeks, and I loved to read. And I thought, well, maybe there's some book at the library that might explain how this works. So I found a book on electronics, and sure enough, it explained how a TV set worked, how the cathode ray tube scanned across the screen and lit up the phosphors and painted a picture 60 times a second. But the electronics book explained a lot more about electronics and electricity and transistors, and they got me hooked. I started getting more books about electronics, some simple projects. My mom would take me to Radio Shack and let me buy some transistors, and I could solder them together and create some simple circuits. And I thought this was cool. And somewhere around that time too, I found out that you can actually make a career in electronics. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So I decided at an early age to become an electrical engineer. Made my educational choices pretty simple because I had a goal in mind: is to graduate from college with an electrical engineering degree and start working as an electrical engineer and have fun with that. So that's what I did. Then I had older brothers and sisters, and my older sister Ellen had gone to the University of Missouri-Rolla, which is a really good engineering school. But she was studying something called computer science, and she came home from this. She came home and she had brought her books home, and one of the books she had was a FORTRAN 4 introduction class. So I started reading that, and I thought, oh, this looks pretty cool. My cousin at the time, Danny, was going to the community college called Florissant Valley, and he also had some classes in computer. At that time, they used punch cards to create programs and feed them into the computer and have the computer run them. But the key of that, they didn't have logins at the time, but you had this what's called a job control card, which pretty much had your identification information on it, and you needed that in order to run a job in the computer. So Danny, for whatever reason, let me borrow his job control card. I took it and wrote a computer program in FORTRAN, following the exercises in the book. And I went to the, you go into this room and there's an operator and you hand him your stack of cards. And sometime during the day, he would fit yours in with the rest of the students. And next day there would be a printout of how your computer ran. Well, the first time I did this, the printout didn't have the output of my program. Instead, it showed the errors that I had made. I had missed a comma in a format statement or something like that. So you'd go, and with the cards, you just had to fix the one line. So you can take that card out and go to the key punch and type a new card up and stick it back in. Then you take this deck and give it to the the computer operator, and come back the next day and see how you did. So eventually I was able to get actual output from the program, and I learned more and more about programming in FORTRAN. This was when I was 16. Then I 16 is kind of when you want to go out and get a part-time job so you can earn some money and have some extra cash to spend. So a lot of people my age, they'd go get a job at McDonald's. That didn't really appeal to me. At this time, I guess it would have been like in late 78, I learned of a computer store opening up near my house. It's called Computer Country. And of course there was also Radio Shacks where I went to get my components, and they sold a computer too called the TRS-80. So I thought, well, why don't I try getting a job there? So I went into the Radio Shack store and asked for a job there, and they said I had to be 18 in order to work in the store. So okay, so I drove over to Computer Country, and I went in. And they had all these microcomputers, including some Apple II computers in there. And I talked to the owner and said, hey, I'm looking for a job. Do you have anything? And he said, well, we just opened up, so why don't you come back in a few months? So I did that, and in a few months I come in. I didn't speak to the owner, but to his brother-in-law, Joe, and Joe was on the floor selling computers, and I told him I was, interested in computers, and I wanted to get a job with dealing with computers. So he opened up the case of an Apple II, which you just pop up, and it exposes the motherboard with all the different integrated circuits. He said, well, okay, show me point out what you see in there. And I said, oh, okay, well, there's the CPU, and there's the RAM, and there's the ROM. And I was able to point out all these components to him, and that impressed him enough. And he said, well, let me get your name and address, and phone number. So he went in and did that. I have to say, though, this guy he had a sense of humor. Because when I first approached him and said, hey, I'd like to get a job here. And he looked down at his shoes and he said, yeah, I'd really like to get a shine on my hush puppies. I go, oh man, what am I in for? Anyway, a few months later, I get a call from him, and he says, hey, where are you? We're up here. We're building out the shop. What he was actually starting up was a distributorship for microcomputers. So I went up there, and he and his friend Mark, that they were best buddies from as kids, and Mark was the shipping department manager, and Joe was the president and CEO, and he was in charge of sales and everything else, and I became the service department manager. So my job was to repair the computers and also act as technical support for the dealers throughout our region. Well, the first thing that he did after hiring me is he flew me down to Oklahoma City, where kind of their parent company was located, and I was trained for 3 days under a guy in their service department on how to fix Apple II computers, which was quite fun. Now, Apple II computers, if you don't know, are really an engineering masterpiece. They were designed by Steve Wozniak, who is an absolute genius in simplicity, and he did things with fewer, with half the components of any other engineer that were quite amazing. One thing he decided, though, when they built the motherboard was to have the integrated circuits in sockets, which make repairing a whole lot easier, because you could just pull one of the integrated circuits out and replace it with a good one, and voila, you have a working computer. So that, I started, and after school I would go over there and work and repair computers and field questions from distributors, from the computer dealers. These were independent computer dealers. We would I would also go out and train these dealers. I remember, I believe, going to somewhere in Illinois, probably Peoria, and here I was, a 16-year-old kid, training these guys, much older than me, with the computer stores on, technical aspects of Apple II computers and some simple things they can do to diagnose them. Anyway, I had that job through the time up until the time I went to Rolla to study. That was about, let's see, probably about 81 that I left for Rolla. And it was a blast. Whenever, and Apple was a growing company at the time, they had, the other thing that Apple II had were computer slots, or slots for peripheral boards. So this created a market for third-party hardware. There would be memory boards, peripherals for printers. I remember a computer synthesizer board that could plug into an Apple II, and I'd learned how to use that. There was another board that provided you extra memory, allowed you to write Pascal programs. So I learned how to program in assembly, BASIC, Pascal, and it was a really good high school job, and it paid a lot better than a McDonald's job too. Anyway, I'm going to stop right there, and we'll pick this up later.